I am recording now, just so you guys know. It's not with the Zoom recorder, it's with the Fathom note taker. All right, so we're gonna be going over full stack application. By learning HTML and CSS, you are equipping yourself with foundational skills needed to create and design web content. HTML and the markup language provides the structural backbones for web pages, allowing you to organize, present content effectively. CSS complements HTML by enabling you to style and format web elements, ensuring a visually appealing and consistent user experience. These essential skills are building blocks for web development, design, empowering your craft responsive, essentially becoming great web developers. So this lesson was pulled from the software development course. So we're going to be going more into actually deploying this with Docker today. All right, so here's how full stack architecture is kind of designed. So you have like your client, which sends a request to the web server, that goes to your app server, then to the database, and then the database then sends the response back all the way up. And then the client actually has not necessarily something physical to grab onto, but something visual. Gets a full response. The client is a web browser. We can use it to curl or Postman, etc. Web servers, typically, this is the first place that a client will go. The client request comes in and the server decides how to handle it. If it's just a static web page, all the server has to do is look at the appropriate HTML document in its file system and send it back to the client. We'll be doing that specific example today. But we're past those days, and usually there's some more complex processing that has to happen. So the web server will hand off the request to the app server, which we will also be doing today. An app server, or the API, this is where any business logic happens. The request is processed and analyzed. The app server needs to interact with the database, it will do so. Any response from the database can be used to formulate a response, which is usually in JSON. Which is then forwarded back to the web server to pass on to the client. The database is in charge of keeping track of data. Since web servers and app servers are meant to be stateless, they don't remember anything, just like functions they take parameters and return results, but not necessarily remembering what they just processed. The database stores anything from passwords to blog posts to user networks. Eventually, you'll be making full stack applications that are deployed on web for anyone to see. As we build up to that end goal, we're going to keep our development local, which is kind of like, I'm sure what you did yesterday was you're hosting or like able to, I guess, see what you deployed using localhost. Here's a diagram of the web application flow. You guys want to take a look at this. And then here's where we're going to get into the meat of today's lesson. So we're going over an app that's called People Getter. All it does is show a list of users or a single user depending on which button you click. All right. So everyone come here and let me show you how to get there real quick. So if you come to like today's lesson, right, which is fullstackapp.md, and that's going to be this first hyperlink under People Getter. Then all right.
Kristen, a quick question if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it. All right, guys, let's get it rolling. So what I'm going to do is I made a directory already, so I'm just going to cd into that. Nothing's in there. Perfect. I'll make sure I don't have any containers running. Awesome. That makes today start on a good track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git clone real quick. So just cloning this repository down. So to start up the backend service containers, which is a Python API and a Postgres database, what we're going to be doing is executing this startup script. But you guys remember this, right? Where we just do a / and then the name. Actually, I got to cd into it first, and then a /. Now that should be up and going. While we wait for that to load, looks like it's up and going. The start all.sh script does three things. It runs the db startup script, which now you guys have in your directory. So once you guys get to your assignment, you can kind of take a look at that. Then dynamically gets the DB's container IP address and writes it to the API DB IP address. So the API container can pick it up. Kind of like what you guys did with Reno where you guys connected them. It's doing that automatically. And then it runs the API startup script, which all is in here, just kind of listed by these different directories. The database folder contains everything needed to run a containerized Postgres database with a preloaded person table. So if you guys look in these files, right, it has the sample data already in there. The startup db.sh script will build the image from the Docker file, then it runs it as a background process. When you guys were in class with Reno on Tuesday, did he go over what a Docker file is?
Yes.
Okay, and how a Docker file is essentially just to build the image.
Yeah, it's like a markdown script to give instructions to pull, build, or
Yeah, definitely. So did he talk about Docker Compose? Do you guys know what Docker Compose is a little
a
bit?
little bit, but he said we get into it later.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely be diving in later on that. So Docker Compose is more of kind of setting up the containers rather than having an image for a container. Does that make sense? So I think Docker Compose of like infrastructure as code in a way, and then think of like the Docker file as like you're building the image that the container is going to be made from. And then obviously you can have like things copied into that image, and so when it builds out, it's already in there. You're deciding, I guess, not necessarily saying like which OS, but kind of in a way, almost like which OS it's going to be using, or which program, whether that's like Python or a Postgres or NGINX or anything like that. But yeah, so then let's see, the Docker. So the script will build the image from the Docker file, which there's a good example in that directory. Then it'll run it as a background process. After a few seconds, it will execute into or exec into the running container and execute the setup db.sh script that creates the person table and inserts the records. That's what I was saying before, like it's already going to have that sample data in there and the table. This service needs to be running before the Python API container because the Python API will need to have access to the database's IP address, which is assigned by Docker when the container starts. The API folder contains everything you need to run Flask API Python, or the Flask API, which is Python Flask. Because Flask is a third-party module, we have to make sure that the container has the necessary dependencies installed, which is listed in the requirements.txt. The server will listen for requests on port 8000. This is configurable, so you could change that from 8000 to 5000, whatever that is. When a request comes into either the /all or /id sidecop to the sidecop G2 will create connection to the database container and fetch the results. Kind of like what we did last week when we were building out those SQL databases or the Postgres databases, right? where we had like the targets and that sort of thing. It's just doing that all automatically for us rather than us creating everything. This one script sets it up for us, which is awesome. The tricky part with this service is it can't know what the database container's host is until the database container is running. Because of that, the host must be configured dynamically. That configuration is handled by the dpip_adr file. This file is created during the execution of the start all.sh script from this command. Right there, right? Quite a mouthful, but it's just parsing through the results of Docker inspect, which, as you can see, if you execute it while the database container is running, is a bunch of JSON describing the running container. We just need one little piece of information from that, which is the IP address. And that way everything can communicate with each other. The database container's IP address is then written to the dpip_adr or ADDR file. That file is then copied into the API container when it's built. Then when Python server.py is executed, the contents of that file are read in and made available for the server. So, no, that's a lot of vocabulary soup, but I think as you guys go through these different directories, you can kind of tie those all in together. Does everybody have this up in their terminal? Did you guys execute the script? So you do control click, right? You get this message success. I think it's just /1 to interact with it. Yep. So now we're getting these, we're just sending requests. We're like, all right, who's the first one on the table that's in the database? And it'll show you here, right? I think also if you do a /all, you can get everything that's in that container or in the database, which is in on a container. And so if you go into this DB file here, right? I think it's in the setup. Nope, that's for the build commands. Here's like all the lines. So if we go here, right, we're like, okay, let's compare. Let's just do /1. And it's Sadie, and then we're comparing and look at that's what's in there, right? Now, so this is kind of similar to what we did last week, but here's the cool thing. So we do just Control C out of this. And you guys all have VS Code, right? If you run a code dot or a code this directory, that's what dot means, right? It's like this current directory that you're in. So you pull this all up. But here's the cool thing. Let's see. See this thing right here on this bottom right? We go click to run container, start live. You can open this in the browser. Look at it. It's hosting our front end, right? Now you can actually interact with the application, which is kind of cool. All right, so the client's job is basically just rendering the HTML. That's really not something you'll have to worry about for this course. For now, we're just going to let the live server VS Code extension act as our web server. This is fine for local development, but eventually we'll be using an NGINX container hosted on AWS. So right now, we will all have to worry about is writing the HTML, CSS, and JS files. Or when it's given to us, that's even better, right? The app server or the API is Flask app. Please note, you do not need to become an expert in Flask. Flask is an HTTP framework like Django, but much simpler. You've already played around with the low-level Python HTTP server. But Flask is just what happens when a bunch of smart people keep having to write HTTP servers, which uses that sidecar G2 to mediate between Python and SQL. And you guys know the database was Postgres, but yeah. So let's go to the next lesson here, which will be using the exact same application, but with an NGINX container. So that way it actually hosts that front end for us. But yeah, let's go ahead and take 15 minutes. Come back. Well, let's just come back at 15 after. How about that? 6:15 Central Time. So front end using NGINX. So last time we succumbed to the vice of non-deployability, punishable by flaying, flailing alive, flying alive, by using a local development server to act as a web server, which that's kind of like what we did with that live server extension thing. That was on VS Code. We're going to use NGINX to handle client requests from the front end web server. People getters architectural diagram should now look like this, but picture isn't there. Well, yeah, it's kind of look more something like kind of like this full thing. Before we just kind of have like the web app and database. Now we're actually going to have, or we just kind of have the app and database and no web server previously. That's okay. Now we're going to get to this front end NGINX. So if you guys want to click on that NGINX link, it's right under that. I'll show it to you guys one more time. Right here under setting up a web server using NGINX. Give me a thumbs up when you guys are there. So that way everyone can kind of code along. Perfect. So NGINX front end. NGINX is an open source software for web serving, reverse proxying, caching, load balancing, media streaming, and more. Today we'll see how we can use it to run as a simple web server. So let me clear this out real quick. So if you're on Mac, use this brew install NGINX. If you're on Windows, using like WSL for Linux, sudo apt install NGINX.
So are we just shutting down the Docker images that we just had and the VS Code that we just had?
Yes, yeah, you don't need them anymore. So good idea. Let's make sure I don't have anything running. Just stop, right? Yeah, let me stop that database real quick. Perfect.
How do you stop? Is there a way to stop everything at once, or do you got to you have to do them one by one?
There is a way. I'll have to dive into my notes for that one.
That's fine.
I don't
just use the first three.
I haven't used Doc or anything.
Oh, you can just do the first two. You can just say Docker stop and then the first two of each of the images.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the first two, then space the first two, then space the first two, and it shuts.
That worked. Thanks.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there's like another way I think to do it like recursively too. Like say you have like a ton of containers running, but that's a command I would have to look up again.
We wanted to do this in a place where we have Docker installed, or I guess a directory where we have Docker.
So for this lesson, it doesn't really matter, but for the next lesson, don't have any Docker containers running or anything like that. So just kind of clear all that out. That's what I would suggest.
I think to stop all the containers is docker ps-k.
-K.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Awesome. Does everyone have all their containers stopped? Oh, -Q for quit. Awesome. If not, I can help you guys after. So just run your sudo apt install nginx, and then pay attention to the installation logs. You'll want to close or clear your terminal until you've taken note of where the nginx configuration is installed on your machine, which will vary from user to user based on their homebrew, how their homebrew is set up. Which I think most will be in this if you're on Mac. I'll show you where ours would be for most of us at least. So you cd into etc, right? And then you can find nginx is right there. cd into nginx. And then you can, is it in conf.d? No, that's not it. It is, oh, just cat out this nginx.conf. And it will show you kind of all of what you need to know here. Biggest thing, okay, is make sure your user is correct here on that conf.d file. So if you cd into etc nginx, cat out this nginx.conf, make sure that you have this here, and if not, go ahead and use vim and change it.
How did you get to nginx folder?
So do cd / etc or etc, and then cd into nginx.
How do we get to Etsy? Because I don't see Etsy on my.
You can do cd 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 till it's there. It's kind of like before your home directory. So if you do a cd / etc,
Oh, here it is. Okay, got it.
yeah. And then in Etsy, that's kind of where all your like your extra like apps and stuff that you've installed like over the time of your Linux box. That's where everything's kind of, all that stuff that would be configured is there. So when we downloaded like Python, like the Python environment, like that's in there, or when we install Docker, that's there, as you can kind of see here. But yeah,
What line should we change in the file?
this first line, just make sure your user is correct. So if you vi conf.d, do that.
So do we do a who am I and whatever it says, that's what should be the user?
Yes. Engine. There we go. Oh, nginx.conf. That's it. Yep, right there. And you guys might have to use like sudo to edit it, or sudo su if it's wrong.
What the heck is this?
Steven, do you have a question?
Sorry about that.
Is if you're on WSL, here's your commands. If you're using Mac, here's your commands there. So it look like something like this: sudo service nginx start. So if you look at this command, a good way to like remember these things, especially when you're using service, is like, all right, you're saying I'm going to use the service command. You're calling out which service you're going to be using, and then what the command is. And in this case, it's start. And then now nginx is started.
And you can be in any folder when you're doing this, Preston?
Yeah, yeah, you can. We're just kind of setting up the service. So make sure you have like NGINX starting, then we can stop it. Right. Then we have start, we can also restart it. So say we make some changes and we need to restart it, which we will in this lesson. That's another thing. I guess I wasn't started previously, so that command didn't work, but that way you can kind of save, like if you need to stop it and then restart it. Just one command other than just stop, then start.
So I just put that command in sudo service inject start. I don't see the Nginx is running.
Yeah, I don't either. Is that you're just
I see it after I put status, like it is running, but it just doesn't return something like yours does.
Yeah, maybe do your status next. That's what I would do.
yeah, I did status and it says it's running. It
All
just
right,
didn't
perfect.
show up.
And then hit stop. My WSL I haven't updated in a little while, so that might be why. But this is the same thing for you, Haisa. You just do brew services, start NGINX, restart, stop. It'd just be using brew.
I started mine pop up something in my computer, background items, edit.
Oh, the notification. I just ignored that. Just want to see it's like if you're running stuff in the background, you get notification.
Yeah. And then if you have questions, do the status, and then once you have the status set, do the NGINX stop, which I think for you would look like that.
Awesome, thank you.
So setting up additional servers, use your text editor of choice to view the nginx.conf file, and Command F to search for server, which we already did.
Preston, do you mind if I share my screen here? Not really sure what's going on.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and pause the recording too. Let's go here.
Looks like you're recording.
Perfect. Let me do that. All right, awesome. So I'm going to be doing now is I just went back to home directory and then went into the week 3. And in here, what I'm going to do is create a new config. Wait. Second, guys. All right. Yeah.
Preston,
Yeah.
quick question. Do you typically, I know the first week we kind of went over this, but do you typically fork these types of repositories, or since we're just doing a project, we just copy the code or the URL?
So in this case, I would do a git clone when you're forking off of like a whole repository. Typically, it's useful for you to have like the entire repository for yourself. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
where you'll actually need to use like the GitHub for it. But for something like this, like yeah, it's not needed.
Okay.
Okay. So then I'm just going to cd into NGINX front end, and we should all be there. Now what we're going to do is if this is where it's going to get different if you're on Mac to WSL. So let's go back to this etc nginx or the nginx directory. So if you just do cd etc nginx, right? And then for us WSL users, if you go to sites available, That's what we're going to do. And do a VI and make this NGINX FE demo, right? Then you're going to go ahead and paste this in. And then once you've done that, go to, I would just use like another terminal. And CD into front end. And if you do a PWD or print working directory, right? Just copy this. And
I'm
then
still stuck on the back part. Sorry. Where
Yep.
where did you find this?
in sites available.
There should be something other than default in there.
So do in sites available, you're gonna VI or touch this NGINX
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
FE one. Yeah. Right here. So you can touch it or VI or nano, like whatever you want to use. And then go ahead and paste this in there. And then what we're going to be changing is this root right here. So that's going to be whatever directory we have this index.html file in, which if you go to that other terminal that I said, or if you go to that directory, if you do a PWD, that's where you're going to copy this right here. And then just paste it in there.
Preston, can you give me the steps for Mac? I'm trying here, but I'm kind of.
You said we're pasting it in where?
Oh, just that
Oh, I
one.
see it. Root.
Yeah, be right here. I think for yours, it should look like this.
PT homebrew. Okay.
So if you go into that same NGINX directory, yours might look like servers, or it might be sites available, something like that. And then CD out of here. You guys don't need to do this. I just have some notes on for this next command. So you're gonna want to run this right here, this sudo ln tacn. I'll put this in chat. You're gonna run this command in your sites available directory after you've created that NGINX FE demo. And what that does is it's a symlink. So if you come out of the sites available and you go into sites enabled, now it's that same file that's in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
And then I will give you,
Wait, so I had to do sudo su again because it says I can't open file for writing. That old NGINX FE demo when I tried closing it.
yeah, just yeah, do sudo su again.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I changed my file permissions on that, but yeah. And then I put that command, once you have that FE demo file in your sites available, that's when you're going to do that symlink in that sites available directory.
What's the symlink?
A symlink is where it's going to essentially copy over that exact same file into the directory that you're telling it to. So in this case, we're symlinking from sites available to sites enabled.
Okay.
So anything that you change sites available will also change in the sites enabled directory, at least that same file, since it is now symlinked. If you guys want to see that one more time,
Yeah, is it symlink in here? Is it on the page here?
what do you mean? It's just a command, so it's going to be sudo ln tacn. You're saying the file that you're symlinking. I think it's actually supposed to be, that's backwards.
Were we supposed to create 2 files?
So we just executed the startup script right here. And now, so this one's doing all of that first people getter. It's executing all the same stuff, but it's also creating the NGINX container where it's going to be hosting our front end out of it.
You're saying it can't find the Docker command. Is this a Docker, or is there Docker commands in this shell?
Yes. Do you not have Docker installed, Jeremy?
I do, but I don't know if you install it. Is it only in one specific spot?
No.
I mean, I've been using Docker this whole week, so
Yeah, that's super odd. Did anyone else have that issue?
It did, and
Docker fault.
oh, go ahead.
Fault.
Say that one
I-
more page.
I said I had that issue when we first started, and I had to do the Docker that we have on the desktop. The desktop version of Docker, I had to go there and just change my settings to on. For some reason, it turned off. But
oh, maybe it turned off. You're saying?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You can do that.
I think I had to restart my computer, so that might be okay.
Yeah, that could have been it. What's up, Flo?
I got an error